In the heart of an ancient mystical forest, where the light barely pierces the dense canopy, there lay a hidden village called Eldoria. The villagers possessed unique abilities passed down through generations, each one connected to the elements of nature. They lived in harmony with their surroundings, using their powers wisely and sparingly. One day, as the sun began to set, painting the sky with hues of orange and purple, a stranger arrived in their midst, clad in worn, out-traveling clothes and bearing an aura of exhaustion. He made his way to the village square, where the villagers gathered for their evening meal. Whispers spread like wildfire among the Eldorians as they took notice of the mysterious figure. The stranger approached Elder Meles, the wise leader of Eldoria, who sat by the central fire pit, her silver hair shimmering in the flickering light. "Greetings, traveler," she said warmly, extending a hand adorned with intricate wooden bracelets carved from the forest's sacred trees. "What brings you to our humble village?" The stranger hesitated for a moment before speaking, his voice laden with urgency. "I come bearing grave news, dear lady. A catastrophe is looming, one that threatens not only Eldoria, but the entire world." A hush fell over the villagers as they exchanged anxious glances. Elder Meles gestured for the stranger to continue, her expression serious. "I am Elan," he began, his voice steady despite the somber tone. "A seer from a distant land, I have seen visions of a great calamity that will befall us all if we do not act swiftly." Elan went on to describe the visions. He had experienced visions of skies darkening with ash and smoke, seas turning into boiling cauldrons, and mountains crumbling under unseen forces. He spoke of people fleeing their homes in desperation, only to find refuge nowhere, as the world seemed to unravel around them. As Elan finished his tale, Elder Meles looked around at her fellow villagers, their faces etched with concern. She turned back to Elan, resolve burning in her eyes. "We will not stand idly by while our world faces such a fate," she declared. "Eldoria will rally together and face this threat head-on." With those words, the village elder began to outline a plan, her voice filled with determination as she called upon the unique abilities of each Eldorian. The stranger from afar had brought them news of impending doom, but he had also ignited within them a spark of hope that, united, they could protect their home and save humanity from the impending catastrophe. Elder Meles wasted no time in rallying the villagers of Eldoria. She summoned each one, asking them to prepare for a gathering that would determine their role in the upcoming struggle against the looming catastrophe. The first to arrive at the village's ancient council tree was Lyra, a young woman whose power over plants and flowers made her the heart of Eldoria's botanical wonders. Her eyes shone with curiosity as she took her seat on one of the wooden roots that served as benches around the colossal trunk. Next came Kale, his body adorned with intricate markings that reflected his dominion over wind and weather. He settled himself beside Lyra, his gaze distant, already considering how he might harness the elements to their advantage. Then there was Thorn, whose mastery over stone and metal could shape the very landscape itself. He sat opposite Kale, his calloused hands resting on his lap, eager to discuss strategies that involved fortifying Eldoria's defenses. Lastly, Elder Meles invited the stranger, Elan, to join them at the council tree. Though he was not an Eldorian by birth, his role in bearing the warning had earned him a place among their ranks. Elan accepted graciously, taking the remaining seat beside Thorn. Once everyone was settled, Elder Meles began. "We have much to discuss and even more to prepare for," she said, her voice steady yet filled with urgency. "Elan has brought us grave news, but it is also an opportunity for Eldoria to prove its worth not just as a haven of peace, but as a bastion against the encroaching darkness." She turned to Elan. "Tell us more about what you have seen. Any detail, no matter how small, could prove vital in our fight against this calamity." Elan nodded solemnly and began recounting his visions once more, providing additional details about the catastrophic events he had witnessed. As he spoke, the other villagers listened intently, their brows furrowed in thought as they considered how best to employ their unique abilities. When Elan finished, Lyra was the first to speak. "If the seas are boiling," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "we must find a way to cool them or provide sanctuary for those who cannot flee." Kale followed suit. "I can try to redirect storms away from populated areas and bring rain to parched lands, but my powers have limits. I'll need help coordinating efforts on a global scale." Thorn leaned forward, his expression thoughtful. "To fortify our defenses, we should focus on creating strongholds in strategic locations, places where people can gather safely during the chaos. I can help construct these shelters using my abilities over stone and metal." Elan listened carefully to each of their contributions before adding his own insights. In my visions, I saw something else, glimpses of beings unlike any we have encountered before. Creatures born from the calamity itself, feeding off the destruction and causing further harm. We must be prepared to face these entities as well. Elder Meles nodded gravely at Elan's words, her gaze sweeping over each member of their council. Then it is settled, she declared. We will prepare for this battle on multiple fronts, cooling the seas, redirecting storms, fortifying safe havens, and facing whatever creatures emerge from the chaos. With newfound purpose, the villagers began discussing specific plans and assigning tasks based on their individual powers. As they worked together, it became clear that Eldoria had not only accepted the challenge laid before them, but was rising to meet it head-on. As the council under the ancient tree came to a close, each villager left with a clear sense of purpose and urgency. They knew they had much work ahead, but the unity and determination shared among them were powerful forces that bolstered their resolve. Elder Meles turned to Elan as the others dispersed. "You have brought us warning, Elan," she said softly, "and now you must decide whether you will stand with us in this fight or continue on your journey." Elan looked at her, then around at the villagers who had already begun preparing for the trials ahead. He could see the strength and resilience in their eyes, even amidst their concern for what was to come. "I have been a wanderer all my life," he replied thoughtfully, carrying tales from one place to another, never settling in any one spot for too long. "But now, I feel as if I've found something worth fighting for, something worth rooting myself in." He took a deep breath before continuing, his voice steady and sure. "I swear my allegiance to Eldoria and its people. I will stand by your side in this battle, and together we shall face the calamity that threatens us all." Elder Meles smiled warmly at him, her eyes crinkling at the corners. "Then welcome, Elan of Eldoria," she said, placing a gentle hand on his shoulder. "Your wisdom and experience will be invaluable in the days ahead." Meanwhile, Lyra had begun gathering plants from around the village, selecting those with cooling properties to help combat the boiling seas Elan had described. She worked tirelessly alongside other villagers who assisted her in preparing poultices, teas, and healing remedies. Kale spent his time communing with the winds, learning their patterns and rhythms as he prepared to redirect them away from populated areas. He practiced harnessing gusts of varying strengths, studying how each could be manipulated to achieve different effects, some to bring much needed rain, others to create protective barriers around threatened communities. Thorn dedicated himself to crafting defensive structures made from the very earth and stone beneath Eldoria's roots. With his newfound purpose, he delved deeper into his abilities than ever before, discovering hidden aspects of his power that allowed him not only to shape materials, but also to infuse them with additional strength and durability. As days turned into weeks, preparations continued apace throughout the village. Messengers were sent out to nearby settlements and beyond, bearing warnings about the impending catastrophe and offering sanctuary to those who sought refuge in Eldoria's protective embrace. In return for their hospitality, many of these refugees brought skills and knowledge that further bolstered Eldoria's defenses. Blacksmiths arrived with weapons forged from Thorn's metals. Healers joined Lyra in caring for the sick and injured, while weather mages assisted Kale in learning advanced techniques to manipulate atmospheric conditions. Yet even amidst all this activity, there remained an air of unease throughout Eldoria. For though they were prepared as best they could be, no one knew exactly when or how the calamity would strike. The village waited anxiously, like a soldier poised on the eve of battle, ready to fight but not yet knowing what lay ahead. One evening, as Elan sat by the communal fire, he found himself beside Elder Meles once more. She looked thoughtful, her gaze fixed upon the dancing flames before them. "What troubles you, my friend?" she asked quietly, turning towards him. Elan sighed softly. "I cannot help but feel we are missing something," he admitted, "some crucial piece of information that could turn the tide in our favor, or at least give us more time to prepare." Meles nodded understandingly. "It is true that much remains uncertain," she agreed, "but sometimes clarity comes not from foreseeing every detail, but rather from facing adversity head-on and adapting as needed." She placed a comforting hand on his arm, her eyes filled with resolve. "We cannot control when or how the calamity arrives, Elan. All we can do is remain steadfast in our preparations and trust that our unity will see us through even the darkest times." Her words resonated deeply within him, bolstering his spirits despite the lingering uncertainty. And so, with renewed determination, they continued their vigil, awaiting the arrival of the storm that would test them all. The first signs of the calamity arrived not with a crash of thunder or a violent quake, but as a gentle murmur carried by the winds themselves. Cale was the one to notice it, his senses attuned to even the slightest variations in atmospheric conditions. He rushed to find Elder Meles and Elan, who were overseeing the final preparations around Eldoria's defenses. "The winds speak of change," he said gravely. "Something approaches, something unlike anything they have ever encountered." Elder Meles' expression became somber. "Then let us ready ourselves," she declared. "It is time to put our plans into action." Villagers scrambled into position, each knowing their role in the coming confrontation. Lyra and her team of healers took up stations within the fortified medical tents, prepared to treat any injuries that might occur. Thorn stood sentinel alongside groups of refugees who had been trained to help defend Eldoria using improvised weapons crafted from scavenged materials. Cale climbed atop one of Thorn's stone towers, his arms outstretched as he drew power from the gathering storm clouds above. He could feel it now, a strange energy pulsating through the air, unlike anything he had ever experienced. It made the hairs on his arms stand on end and sent shivers down his spine. Meanwhile, Elan joined Elder Meles at the village's entrance, where they watched nervously as the first tendrils of darkness began to snake across the horizon. The sky grew incrementally darker, as if an eclipse were taking place, but there was no sun to blot out, only an ever-growing shadow that seemed to swallow all light in its path. As the shadows reached Eldoria's borders, a sudden chill fell over the village. Then came the first manifestation of the calamity, twisted, writhing creatures that seemed born from the darkness itself. They moved with eerie grace, their forms shifting and changing like liquid night given life. The battle for Eldoria had begun. A piercing scream cut through the air as one of the creatures lunged towards a group of refugees huddled behind a makeshift barricade. Thorn, standing nearby, stepped forward without hesitation, drawing upon his power to shape the earth beneath him into a towering wall that shielded them from harm. But more creatures followed, swarming over the newly formed barrier like shadows given form. Thorn gritted his teeth, his muscles straining as he fought to maintain control over his stone constructs, trying desperately to keep pace with the onslaught. Meanwhile, Cale unleashed the full force of his storm, born fury upon the invaders. Bolts of lightning crackled through the air, striking down several creatures with each blast, yet for every one felled, two more seemed to take its place. The wind howled around him, whipping his hair into a frenzy as he channeled all his willpower into repelling the encroaching darkness. Back at the entrance, Elder Meles and Elan faced off against a particularly grotesque creature that towered over them like some twisted mockery of life. Its eyes burned with malevolent intelligence, making it clear this was no mere mindless beast, but something far more sinister. Elan reached out tentatively, his palm hovering inches from the creature's obsidian hide. He felt a pulse of cold energy emanating from its surface, then suddenly he saw within his mind's eye a glimpse of where this monstrosity had come from, a vast, churning abyss filled with countless more such beings. As if sensing Elan's intrusion, the creature lashed out, its tendrils whipping towards him like snakes. But Elder Meles was quicker. She threw herself between them, taking the brunt of the attack upon her own body. Her cry of pain echoed through the air as she crumpled to the ground. Elan rushed to her side, but it was clear that her injuries were grave. "Get back inside," she rasped, pushing him away weakly. You must warn the others." With heavy heart, Elan left Elder Meles' side and raced deeper into Eldoria's defenses. He found Lyra tending to a wounded villager amidst a flurry of activity within one of the medical tents. "Lyra," he gasped out urgently, "Elder Meles has fallen. We need reinforcements now." Her eyes widened with shock, but she wasted no time questioning him further. Instead, she rallied her healers, and together they hurried towards the village entrance, determined to shore up Eldoria's defenses against the unrelenting assault. As more villagers joined the fight, the tide seemed briefly to turn in their favor. Yet even as they battled valiantly against the encroaching darkness, none could deny that this was merely a skirmish, the first clash of many in what promised to be an arduous and brutal war. For though they had fought well and held firm against the initial onslaught, there remained no doubt the calamity had only just begun. As the battle raged on, Elan found himself drawn back into the fray. He could not stand idly by while his newfound home was threatened, and so he took up arms alongside his fellow villagers. Together they fought against the endless tide of shadows, each person playing to their unique strengths. Kale called forth violent gusts of wind that buffeted the creatures, sending them careening into one another or blasting them back. Towards the darkness from whence they came, his powers seemed especially effective against those nearest him, but the sheer number of enemies made it impossible for even his formidable abilities to turn the tide entirely. Lyra and her fellow healers worked tirelessly to keep their people alive, tending to wounds and administering restorative potions whenever there was a moment's respite. Yet despite their best efforts, casualties mounted, and soon the medical tents were filled with groans of pain and whispers of despair. Meanwhile, Thorn's powers waned as exhaustion set in. His once formidable constructs began to crumble under the relentless pressure of the shadow creatures, who seemed to grow ever stronger even as Eldoria's defenses faltered. Seeing his friend struggle, Elan rushed to Thorn's side. "Hold firm," he cried out, clasping hands with him for a moment before turning back towards the battlefield. As he did so, he felt something shift within himself, a sudden rush of energy that seemed almost tangible in its intensity. He reached out mentally, seeking to understand this new sensation, and found it connected to Thorn, a pulsating wellspring of strength born from their shared determination. Drawing upon this reserves, Elan redoubled his efforts, channeling the combined might of their resolve into bolstering Eldoria's defenses. With renewed vigor, they fought on side by side, carving out a small pocket of safety amidst the chaos. But even with this temporary reprieve, it was clear that something had to change, for neither they nor their people could continue at such a pace indefinitely. As if sensing their desperate need, Elder Melis suddenly appeared before them. Her wounds had been tended by Lyra herself, and though she still bore signs of her earlier ordeal, she stood tall and proud, her eyes burning with newfound purpose. "Listen to me," she said firmly, addressing the gathered fighters. "Our tactics thus far have proven ineffective against this foe. We cannot hope to defeat it through brute force alone." She paused, letting her words sink in before continuing. "I have communed with our ancestors' spirits while recuperating. They speak of an ancient ritual, long forgotten, but still remembered by the winds themselves. If we can harness their power and combine it with our own, perhaps then we may turn back this darkness." A murmur ran through the crowd as villagers looked uneasily at one another. Such a task would require great skill and even greater courage, yet they knew all too well that there was no other choice. Kale stepped forward, determination in his eyes. "I will do whatever it takes to save Eldoria," he declared. "If this ritual exists, I will find it." Elder Melis nodded gravely. "Then go, Kale. Find the ancient wind spirits and convince them to share their wisdom with us. Time grows short, we must act now, if we are to have any hope of salvation." As Kale set off on his perilous journey, the rest of Eldoria's defenders redoubled their efforts against the encroaching shadows. They fought not just for themselves, but also for those who would come after them, for every child born under this new dawn, and for every generation yet unborn. For they knew that even if they should fall in battle, their sacrifice would be remembered. Their struggle against the darkness would echo through time, inspiring future generations to take up arms and carry on the fight until at last, light triumphed over darkness once more. But first, they had to survive the night. And so they stood firm, united under the ancient tree, ready to face whatever horrors the coming hours might bring. As dawn broke, Kale returned with news of the ritual and a warning that time was running out. The villagers listened intently as he spoke of what lay ahead, their hearts heavy but resolute in purpose. Together, they prepared for one final stand against the encroaching shadows. For they knew that if they failed here, all would be lost, and with it, any hope of a brighter future for Eldoria and its people. And so, amidst the gathering darkness, they gathered their weapons, steeled themselves for battle, and waited for the storm to begin. As Kale finished speaking, Elder Melis stepped forward once more. She held aloft an intricately carved stone tablet, its surface etched with ancient runes that seemed to shimmer in the dim light. "This is what we have been waiting for," she said solemnly, handing the tablet to Elan. "The ritual must be performed by one pure of heart and strong in spirit. You, Elan, are our chosen champion." Elan took the tablet with reverent hands, feeling its weight settle into his grasp. He looked up at the expectant faces surrounding him, friends, neighbors, people he had known all his life, and felt a surge of determination swell within him. "I will not let you down," he vowed, before turning to face the encroaching shadows once more. As dawn broke fully, revealing the full extent of the darkness that lay ahead, Elder Melis began to chant. Her voice rang out clear and steady, calling upon the ancient spirits of wind and light to lend their strength to Eldoria's defenders. The villagers joined in, their voices rising together in harmonious unity, each syllable imbued with hope and courage. The very air around them seemed to hum with energy as the ritual took effect, and for a moment it felt as though time itself had paused, held captive by the power of their shared resolve. But then, with a sudden chill that cut through even the thickest coats and cloaks, the shadows began to move once more. They surged forward like a tide, swallowing everything in their path, and all too soon, the first tendrils reached Eldoria's defenses. Elan stepped forward, raising the tablet high above his head. As he did so, he felt a sudden influx of power coursing through him, not his own, but something far greater, drawn from the very essence of Eldoria itself. It was as if every tree root, every stone wall, and every drop of water within the village had lent its strength to aid him in this desperate hour. With a fierce cry, he brought the tablet crashing down onto the ground before him, shattering it into 1,000 tiny fragments. As they fell, they began to glow with an intense light, casting back the shadows and revealing the true extent of the creature's power. For now, however, those creatures faltered, recoiling from the brightness like insects scalded by sunlight. The villagers seized their chance, charging forward with renewed vigor, determined to push back the darkness once and for all. Elan fought alongside them, his body moving almost independently as he wielded powers beyond anything he had ever known. With each strike of his sword, he could feel the shadows retreating not just from him, but from everyone around him, as if his actions were somehow amplifying their own defenses. Yet even as they fought, they knew that this was not enough to defeat the darkness entirely. They needed more time for Kale to complete his task and return with the full power of the ancient winds at his command. As if sensing their thoughts, a sudden gust of wind blew through Eldoria's defenders, carrying with it the faintest whisper of words. "Hold firm, my friends, help is coming." Kale, Elan thought, feeling a surge of hope. He must have succeeded in convincing the ancient spirits to aid them after all. But even as that hope took root within him, something changed. The shadows began to shift and coalesce, drawing together into a single, massive form that loomed over Eldoria like an oppressive storm cloud given life. It was unlike anything they had faced before, a creature born not from fear or despair, but from the very essence of darkness itself. Elan knew instinctively that this thing could not be defeated by conventional means. No blade would pierce its formless body, no spell would harm it directly, to stand any chance against such an adversary. They would need to confront their deepest fears and find a way to banish the darkness within themselves first. He turned to his friends Thorn, Lyra, Kale, who had just reappeared amidst them, his eyes blazing with newfound power. "We cannot destroy this thing," he told them grimly, "but perhaps we can send it back whence it came." Together, they joined hands, closing their eyes as one and focusing inward upon the darkness that lay hidden within each of them. They explored its depths, facing down their own fears and insecurities until at last they found themselves standing before manifestations of those very same shadows. "Banish these," Elan commanded, his voice echoing through the mental landscape like thunder. "Drive them back into the light." And so, with a unified cry, they turned upon their inner darkness, fighting not with weapons or spells, but with courage and determination born from love for one another and their home. As they did so, they felt the creature above them begin to waver, its form growing less solid, more tenuous by the moment. Then, with one final shout, they cast out their shadows, sending them hurtling back into the light. The massive creature screamed, a sound that seemed to shake Eldoria itself, before dissolving into harmless motes of darkness once more. As dawn broke fully over Eldoria, casting its golden rays across the village and its people, there was a collective sigh of relief. The shadows had been banished, their power broken forever by the united strength of those who called Eldoria home. Exhausted but victorious, Elan turned to his friends, embracing them one by one as they gathered around him. "We did it," he whispered, tears pricking at the corners of his eyes. "Together we saved our home." And amidst the cheers and joyous cries that echoed through Eldoria that morning, there was never any doubt in anyone's mind that this day would forevermore be remembered as the dawn of their true unity, a bond forged in darkness, but tempered by love and strengthened by courage. As the villagers began to tend to their wounds and survey the damage done to their homes, Elder Meles approached Elan, her expression grave despite the celebration unfolding around them. "Elan," she said, taking him gently by the arm and leading him away from the others, "there is something you must know, something I should have told you long ago." They walked together towards the edge of Eldoria, where the forest bordered the village. its ancient trees standing sentinel against the encroaching wilds beyond. "What is it, elder?" Elan asked softly, concern etched into his features as he regarded her lined face. Meles paused, taking a deep breath before continuing. "The darkness that threatened us today, it was not merely an isolated event brought on by our fears and doubts. It was a manifestation of something far greater of force that has been growing stronger with each passing year." She turned to him, her eyes filled with worry. "You've felt it too, haven't you? The creeping unease, the feeling that something is not quite right in the world around us." Elan nodded slowly, remembering the strange dreams and premonitions that had plagued him of late. He had dismissed them as mere fancy, but now he wondered if there might be more to it than he'd thought. "The shadows are connected," Meles explained, "bound together by an unseen hand, feeding off one another's power until they threaten to consume everything in their path. And I believe that this force has its origins here in Eldoria." Elan looked at her sharply, surprise etched into his face. "Here, but how? It was long before your time," Meles interrupted gently. "When I was but a young woman, serving as an acolyte to the previous elder, we uncovered an ancient artifact buried deep within these very woods. It was said to possess immense power, capable of granting its wielder dominion over both light and darkness." She hesitated briefly before continuing. "We were warned against activating it, told that such power would come at a great cost, but pride and curiosity got the better of us, and we ignored those warnings. We attempted to harness the artifact's power for ourselves, believing that with it we could protect Eldoria from any threat imaginable." Her voice grew softer still, barely above a whisper, but something went wrong. The ritual went awry, and instead of granting us dominion over light and darkness, it opened a door between our world and something else, something ancient and malevolent that began to twist the shadows around us into weapons against its would-be jailers. Elan stared at her in disbelief. "This is my fault," he breathed, horror coloring his words. "I'm responsible for all this darkness." "No," Meles insisted firmly, taking both of his hands in hers. "None of us could have known what would happen. We acted with the best intentions, but underestimated the power we were dealing with. The blame lies not with you or any single person, but rather with our collective hubris." She squeezed his hands gently before releasing them once more. "But now that we understand the true nature of this threat, we have a chance to put things right, to close the door between worlds and banish the darkness forever." Elan nodded solemnly, determination burning brightly within him despite the weight of this new revelation. "What must I do?" he asked. Meles smiled sadly at him. "First, you must gather your friends, those who stood beside you in battle today. They have proven themselves worthy allies and will be vital in facing what lies ahead." She paused, her gaze drifting towards the heart of Eldoria's ancient forest. "And then, together, you must journey into the depths of that wood, seeking out the very place where we first unlocked the artifact's power so long ago. There, deep beneath the earth, you will find an entrance to the realm beyond a prison constructed by our ancestors to contain the darkness within." Elan followed her gaze, feeling a chill run down his spine as he contemplated the task before him. But there was no hesitation in his voice when he spoke again. "I understand," he said resolutely. "We will find this entrance and put an end to all this once and for all." Meles smiled at him then, pride shining in her eyes. "I knew you would, Elan. Eldoria could not ask for a braver champion." With that, she turned away, leaving him alone amidst the whispering trees as she returned to the festivities unfolding back in Eldoria proper. As he watched her go, Elan took a deep breath, steeling himself for the trials that lay ahead. He knew now that their victory over the shadows was but the first step in a much larger journey, one that would test them all in ways they could scarcely imagine. But he also knew that he was not alone. Surrounding him were friends who had proven themselves steadfast and true, allies willing to stand beside him even against such daunting odds. Together, they would face whatever horrors awaited them beneath the earth, and together they would put an end to the darkness once and for all. And so, with renewed purpose burning in his heart, Elan turned away from the edge of Eldoria's ancient woods, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead on their quest to heal the broken bond between light and shadow.